Hi, my name is Palacpac, creator of Fully Housewife, The Wiser Years. Welcome to my homeschool podcast. In this podcast, my husband Jay and I will be talking about our lifestyle and our journey as a homeschooling family here in the Philippines. We will be talking about what we do and what we do not do, and how we raise and educate our 3 children who happen to be creatives and artists. We will be talking about our wins, our losses, and our mistakes. And we will also be talking to other seasoned homeschooling families to give you a better picture, so other homeschooling families can figure out and customize their homeschool journeys based on all of our experiences. Catch us weekly on Fully Housewife, The Wiser Years Homeschool Podcast. Hi everyone, welcome to Fully Housewife, The Wiser Years Homeschool Podcast, episode 4, and I am with Diane Gabriel. I've known Diane for quite some time because she acted as a facilitator for 2 of my kids at Abot Tala, but I've known her prior to that online. I've invited Diane because I wanted to know more the side of the parents who homeschool neurodivergent kids, which is what she is. She's not an expert in the field, but she is a mom, and I want to hear what it's like for them, because I've been part of this homeschooling communities in the Philippines for quite some time now, and I noticed that a lot of parents who have questions about how to homeschool their children in this area don't really receive that much support, and I want to provide them with some information that may help them. Hi, Diane. Thank you for
Hi.
gracing us with your presence today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me also.
Why don't you introduce yourself and let people know who you are and what you do?
Oh, well, there you go. I'm Diane. I am a stay-at-home mom, work-at-home mom to 3 boys, all neurodivergent kids. And I'm currently one of the staff mentors at Abot Tala, and also the parent coordinator for Abot Tala. And so, yeah, and that's what I do mostly at home, and PA to my husband, who's a freelancer. I always joke that I'm also the personal assistant. So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned Abot Tala. I was really planning on talking about that because I met Diane in Abot Tala, where my children are, where not so typical learners go. I'm gonna go ahead and promote it already.
Yes,
You guys are looking for out-of-the-box classes and programs, you might want to look into Abot Tala. They are opening their block for the year, the first block of the year.
Yes.
So if you want to register your children, your teenagers, and get to know other children who are unconventional learners, such as mine, this might be the best place for them.
Yes.
So
yes.
Why don't you tell us about your homeschool setup?
Our homeschool setup. Okay, right before we started, I jokingly told my husband, "What is our homeschool setup?" Ang sagot niya, non-existent. Because I said, we really take it, a day at a time. I mean, I guess just to provide a little insight, when you have, neurodivergent boys, my eldest has been diagnosed with autism. He's autistic, and my second son has SPD, which is sensory processing disorder. So he is autistic, but in a different way. So he's more of a sensory processing issue. And then my youngest, although he hasn't been formally diagnosed, is neurodivergent as well. And so the 3 of them being so different, I can't exactly dictate the day and say, okay, we're gonna do this today, because let's say something sets one of them off, or someone wants to do something else. Like, let's say I planned for, we're gonna learn this topic, but they want to paint, then there's nothing I can do about that, really. I don't want to go against their moods too much, because that's really how they are. And at the beginning of our journey into homeschooling, that was something that I really had to learn to let go. Because when people ask me, like, "Oh, so when did you start homeschooling?" Usually I would joke, like, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was already reading about, I was reading homeschooling blogs. I was
Mm.
trying to learn the ins and outs. I love the idea of homeschooling, and we were surrounded by families, people we admire, our mentors who were homeschooling as well. And so it was something that I felt prepared to do, and I really thought that I was going to do a good job.
Mhm.
And a few years later, and our eldest got diagnosed, kind of any homeschooling idea or setup is kind of out the window at that point, because your expectations really change. And I think parents of those who are neurodivergent, parents of autistic kids, will relate to this, because the moment you receive the diagnosis, all of a sudden there's all of these other questions that come into play, right? And even their development comes into question. Like, it is no longer what you would expect of normal development. So how can you expect to have, a normal homeschooling day? I guess that's the best way I could put it. And so I guess that, to say that we have a homeschool setup. Our setup now is very free,
Okay.
very self-directed. Like, I really observe what keeps them interested, what they love to do, and make things as available as possible. And this was ever since, they were young. Like, when
Mm.
I knew that they were really into arts and music, we would have a caddy of,
Mhm.
available art materials. It wasn't there was no art time or
Mhm.
circle time or anything like that. It was, do art the whole day, sure. Or my son would listen to music or watch music videos. Why
Mhm.
not? Or in the afternoons, it would be nature documentaries, because all of a sudden he's into the ocean, like everything about the ocean. And so that would be our curriculum, so to speak,
Okay.
for the next couple of weeks or months. And so it was sort of go with the flow, for us. And I guess that's our setup. Or, as my husband would say,
Resources.
non-existent. Yeah.
I actually like the idea, to be honest.
Mm.
We're sort of like that. I was wondering about resources and materials because you have to
Mm.
be prepared at least,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes,
So,
definitely.
what are the things that you have made available for your children? What are there certain books, certain materials, art materials? What kind of art materials do you have in your home?
Yes. Yes. In terms of materials, I would say homeschooling communities are such a big help.
Mhm.
People who would share links to, like, oh, here are activities you can do for your 5 year
Mhm.
old.
Okay.
I have a book called, things that your 3 to 6 year old can do. And I still refer to it until now, every now and then, when I run out of ideas for stuff for them to do. In terms of art materials, I know some friends, I know parents who are like, oh, I don't like too much mess, or let's be careful, wear a frock when you're painting. And that was something I also had to let go with them, because when they're drawing, when they're making art, it's really going to be all over the place. So in
Mhm.
terms of availability, I mean, we've got, paper, paints, pens, chalk, anything that I feel that they'd have fun with. And then in terms of books, well, reading kasi is one of the struggles that they have, but we do have books available, and I don't, like, stop them from, exploring it, even if it meant that the pages would get a little, wrinkly, or
Yeah.
um
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, like, I can't be like, no, that's not how you hold the book, because they're very tactile sometimes,
Yes.
especially when they were younger.
Mhm.
We had certain books that were out of reach. Now
Mhm.
only mommy and daddy can read to you.
Mhm.
But other than that, they were free to explore the art, the pages. Even if they, let's say, even if they didn't read the words, I would let them explore the books. And definitely, apps. And I remember one of our visits to our dev ped, and he gave us a list of like apps that they could use on the iPad or iPhone. And it was sort of a big weight off of me that hindi siya bawal. You know, like it wasn't a, okay, since they're autistic, no screen time, because it was something that we didn't want to limit for them. And so they do have a lot of what you would say as screen time. But I remember reading this advice where don't look at it as just screen time, because when they're on their devices or when they're, you know, watching something, they're absorbing a lot. They're learning language. They're taking in a lot of visuals. There are things that my son would commit to memory and talk about, you know, weeks later. And just an example, he was 3 years old. This was long before his diagnosis. And I remember trying to teach him the alphabet, like the conventional way, right? Flashcards, magnet letters and stuff. And he would get maybe one or two, and I'll be like, okay, you know, that was one of the red flags before. But it's like, okay, maybe he's not picking it up yet. But we said 3 years old, he can play with the iPad. He's allowed. And so on his birthday, when he turned 3, he was playing with this app, and it's a reader's app that had sounds, like it would say, let's say it would go like that, and they were little monsters. 15 minutes or 20 minutes playing with the app, and he knew all of the letters, like just like that. And I was like, wow. And I've been trying all of these months, trying to teach him, you know, through flashcards, and it wasn't clicking. And I think, if anything, that was one sort of turning point for me to not stick to just because I think, oh, this is the way to teach him. And I'll, you know, I will insist on that way because he could learn it some other way that I didn't think of, right? And that really surprised me. I even have it on video where he completely got, like it just clicked with him simply because of the way the program did it for him. And even years later, there's so many things that he knows now because of how he got to tinker with it, either from a program or a book or, you know. And so I don't impose like learning methods on them. Like I don't want to say, no, we did flashcards, so you're gonna do flashcards. so that was, I guess, a big turning point for us, for me.
It just hit me when you said that this is like an example, a good example of how self-directed learning is really effective, not just for neurodivergent, but for kids in general. Well, because they know how to learn what they want to learn, right?
Yes.
So I love that you said that because we don't really know how each child's brain works and how they absorb information. So it's the same way actually with my kids, because I let them decide for themselves how they want to learn something. For example, my eldest son, he likes to watch. He's not a reader. He's not much of a reader, but he watches.
I can relate. Yeah.
He reads a little, but he watches more. And he absorbs information that way. But the other two are bigger readers than him. So it's really not exclusive to just neurodivergence, but I'm glad that you said that. Maybe right now, there's a lot of warnings that come with gadget use.
Yeah.
But in this case, it shows that how technology is actually beneficial.
Yes.
Especially to a specific set of kids who learn that way, maybe probably the visual ones, the more visual ones. So would you say your son is visual, or is it really just his way of learning?
Okay, my eldest son is very visual. In fact, for a while and until now, we sort of believe he kind of has an eidetic or photographic memory to an extent.
Wow.
And so, which is why I love that, you know, he learns through visual aid, like watching and reading, but he likes looking at very visually heavy, you know, books. And then my second son is very auditory. Even though he has sensory processing disorder, the downside of that is like his hearing is so in tune. Like he hears everything,
Mm,
things
oh,
that
wow.
we would consider
Yeah.
white noise. For example, that like right now I could hear the fan, and I could hear the door creak. I
Mhm.
could tune it out, but for him he can't. And so when
Mhm.
we're out, he would wear headphones, noise canceling
Ah,
headphones.
okay.
But I see the advantage to that is when it comes to music,
Mhm.
he can hear like everything, the percussion, the second voice, the melody.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
and it's so amazing how he applies that. Like, again, there's this game. It looks like a game to others because it's got
Mhm.
characters and things, but it's a way to compose and arrange music. And my son could arrange music like you
Wow.
would an orchestra, like from
Wow.
percussion to violin to piano, and all of the little nuances of a song, which I don't even have the patience to do, and I'm formally trained in music, and
Do you
he just does
upload?
it.
Do you
Yeah.
upload this music? Can we share
Yes,
that? I'd
they
love
do
to
have a
hear
YouTube
them.
channel.
Oh, they
Okay,
do. They
they
do. We
do.
will put that in the description
Okay,
box later for them to check out so that
like and
others,
subscribe.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
they love that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so that was one of the things I discovered about him. And so we're not for now we're doing away with, like, okay, you need to learn to read music first, or formal training, or what. It's really all through listening and then
Mm.
playing it in a game. But I mean, in terms of his skill, he surprises us, all the time. Both of them, actually, they do it. um so yeah.
Your son and I will get along very well. I will be a
Yeah.
listener and he would be playing his music right in
Okay.
front of me. I'm always amazed by those kinds of kids.
Hmm.
Um,
Thank you.
Speaking of the auditory part,
Yes.
is read aloud effective on him? Read alouds or audiobooks?
Lately, surprisingly, it was a recent discussion. Me and my husband, like, I asked him, maybe we should try to see if they would like audiobooks, since they like listening more. We haven't tried it yet.
Yeah.
When they were younger, I love the idea of reading to them. You know
Yeah.
how we always see advice about, if you want your kids to read early,
Yeah.
read to them bedtime stories.
Yes.
And oh my goodness, we would try. I mean, we tried so hard, but they'd be like dancing
Ah.
around, and we feel like they're not paying
Yeah,
attention.
yeah.
Um, and when they were toddlers, we figured, okay, maybe they're bored, maybe they don't like the story or what. It was only later on that we realized that
Mm.
it wasn't yet. They weren't processing what we
Mm.
were saying, what the
Mhm.
words that we were saying, and later on they needed, therapy, occupational therapy and speech therapy to really grasp language. So, but at the time we just thought, okay, they don't like stories, they don't like bedtime stories or reading. But now, now that they're older, it's something that we will consider,
Yeah.
and definitely, because I feel it would be more effective than trying to make them, sit down and read words.
There was this speaker before in a homeschool conference. I don't know if you remember him. I forgot his name actually, but I'm going to put his name later in the description box. But he was
Hmm.
talking about the benefits of audiobooks. You
Hmm.
just play it, and because he had a son who had problems, so he was dyslexic.
Okay.
His son
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
dyslexic,
Yeah.
he couldn't read books. So they went for audiobooks, and he would also play them in the car. That's what he said. He would play them in the car.
Yeah.
And because the kids don't really have any choice, of course, you take away the gadgets when they're in the
Yeah.
car. Most of the time, they have no choice but to tune into what's coming out of the speakers, which were the audiobooks. And
Hmm.
eventually, his son became such a voracious leader
Yeah.
of audiobooks. But at one time, he said, "Have you read this book?" And his son said, "Oh, I listened to the audiobook. How is that any different?" That's what he said. So the important part there is actually the information that's being taken in, not
Yes.
really much of how they're doing it, but how they are acquiring the information that they need. So I'd like an update on that later on
Yes,
when you
sure,
start on it,
sure.
because I'd like to know
Absolutely.
if that's effective.
And actually, I did read also somewhere that somebody said, don't stop reading to your kids, let's say when they know how to read. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, you know
Yes,
how
yes,
once
yeah,
they learn to read, they're like, okay, you can read your own books, but
yeah,
you can continue to read like chapter books or more comprehensive books to them, because sometimes auditory processing
yeah,
is a little more advanced than reading.
yes, yes,
And so they can take in
yes,
actually more
yeah,
advanced information when they listen to it versus just reading it themselves. And so sometimes we forget to read to them just because they
yeah,
know how to read already.
yeah,
But I did read somewhere that, continue to read to them. They love that and they love taking in. Maybe that's why they like watching, right? Because they can listen to the stories that way. So yeah, I will update you on that once we start getting into that habit.
Can you tell us a bit of the challenges that you go through on a regular basis with your children homeschooling, with different needs?
Okay, well, like I mentioned earlier, one is really the expectations.
Mm-mm.
That was something that it was really years of process until now. Until now, we still have to sometimes let go of certain expectations, especially when you see my boys, where there would be expectations where you're 11 already, so you should
Ah,
doing
yes,
this or you should
yes,
know
yes.
this already, and then we have to take a step back and remember how developmentally where they are or at what pace are they really taking it in. Like sometimes we remind ourselves
Yeah.
from that. And even before, like when
Mhm.
when we were out, um I wouldn't I mean, once in a while we'd even get comments like, wow, they don't seem autistic to me, or they don't look autistic. And that can be a downside even for us, because sometimes we feel like, okay, you're ready to do this, or you should
Mhm.
know how to do
Yeah.
this already.
Mhm.
But you know we sometimes get this reality check or reminder, like, okay, no, he's not yet developmentally ready. Or um and whenever we have those reminders, it does, sometimes it can be discouraging. It's like, okay, we need a little more work on that, or we need to um be more patient and wait for when he's ready. And so that can be a really big challenge. Early on, like when we started, I was doing first, we were doing the whole traditional homeschool route. Like I got all the materials, the the teacher
Yeah.
supplement with
Yeah.
that. And I think Ralph was around 4, so he was kinder, or a pre-K rather. And I was trying to follow the schedule,
Mhm.
right? Doing, okay, we'll do circle time, and then now we'll do this. And every day something would happen, or it wouldn't go as expected, and it would be frustrating.
Yeah.
Frustrations would be like, this isn't how it sounds. Like, how come in the blogs it seems so
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
and at the time my mindset was like, it's school at home, right? It
Mhm.
should be
That's right.
structured,
That's right. Mhm.
and and I should know this. I mean, this is easy,
Mhm.
or so I thought. But the challenges, especially with special needs kids, is that, like, what if you planned your day, but then they wake up, quote unquote, on the wrong side of the bed, or they
Yeah.
have a meltdown, or they're having leaky gut syndrome, and they're just not in the mood. And these are things that we had to deal with, especially in the early years. Like, on top of just homeschooling, we were doing therapy, we were doing neurofeedback, we were dealing with meltdowns out of nowhere, and I think that's why we had that shift. Like by our second year, I knew already that traditional homeschooling, the way it looked like to me,
Mhm.
on paper, and what I read about, is not going to work with them.
Yeah.
And so it shifted really our perspective. It's like obviously our priorities should be them developmentally, right? And so we
Yes.
really
Yes.
focused on their therapies. We focused on their diet. Actually, for a long time, it was really also their diet, and um, getting more input as to how we can help them develop more than like, oh, he needs to know how to add, or he needs to know math by now, or he's not reading yet. I mean, these are things that I would have focused on if we were traditionally homeschooling, but they're not traditional kids. So I guess that would be the biggest challenge. I mean, really, you have to let go of expectations, and it's easier said than done, because until now I do have those, what parent doesn't, right? Like every year you have expectations of where your kid would
I
be
don't.
or should be. Right, or at least for me, developmentally, like where they are, and sometimes it's like a challenge, and then sometimes it's a good thing, like they would surprise us by doing something that, oh my gosh, you're already doing that. I did, it slipped by us, and they were ready for it na pala. So yeah, so those kinds of things were a challenge in our homeschool journey, and not so much now with our eldest because he's 12, and so he's a little more independent. He could already tell us what he wants in terms of like what he wants to know about, what he's curious about, and things he wants to learn. With our two younger, we're still sort of on the observant role, like where would his strengths be, how can we guide that, and what can we do to help him, and what are his challenges. Like for Nate, simple things, auditory challenge, we get him noise canceling headphones, make sure his bedtime, or we don't put him in situations where he would have sensory overload, just things like that. So it's sometimes it's not just a homeschool day that we're worried about, it's really just them, how they're gonna be like, for the day, just on a day-to-day basis.
But that's very practical.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm drawn back to that because sometimes let's say not really expectations, but sometimes I would look at my children and I wonder if they're having the best day.
Yes.
So, like, isn't that supposed to be the priority, that they feel the contentment and the fulfillment for the day for themselves, not because we told them it has to be a certain way, but because it is the way they are. So you were talking about the therapists and the neuro and the development.
Neurofeedback.
Yeah. And earlier we talked about the development of pediatrician. And we have the same, Dr. Dimalanta. So I was wondering, when you are trying to teach your kids new things, do you consult your therapist or your deaf ped about them before you go through with it?
Not really. Like I mean, I don't ask them like, oh, are they ready for this? Sometimes we would tell them, or we would share things like, oh, look what Nate did today, or look what Raf's into now. And I love it that they're very how would I say it? Like they would sometimes include that, like if they know, oh, Raf's into robots now, and so I would notice that when they go through their lessons, it's all robots, or she would take into account what they're into to sort of catch their attention. And so I love that they're very open to our cuento, like because I would send them stuff that they're into, or stuff that they talk about. And in terms of consulting, like I think once in a while I would ask them, like, this is very challenging for us, would you have any advice on how to get him to be more open to it, and things like that. And although this was again early on, like when it was mostly occupational therapy, like, oh, how do I get him to sit still or pay attention, like just for this, like I don't want to force them to do anything. But sometimes we do need to address the hyperactivity, or we need to address meltdowns, and how to go about that.
So is that what occupational therapy is about? I'm sorry, but I need to be educated on that. What is occupational therapy?
Well, they did this when they were much younger. That was one of the first things they did. The way it was described to us, the therapy is really to help them with the day-to-day things, occupational therapy. And I remember when during the first few meetings of Raph with his OT, it was very hard to watch for me as a parent, because you could see his struggles, like simple things that I didn't realize we would take for granted for, let's say, kids their age. Like, I don't know, like off the top of my head, like, for example, you tell him, okay, can you take this block and put it in the basket over there? And he would struggle with that, one step instruction. And OT would be sort of getting that, like working on that, getting him to understand one step instruction, and then increasing to two steps instruction. Okay, bring this there, put it down, and get this one back. And it's so simple. Like, these are things that a neurotypical child would maybe just learn on their own by playing. And this was something that they needed help on, with a professional. and it did, actually, what I noticed OT did for them was more than the physical aspects of it. It would turn on like certain cognitive abilities. Like, before OT, Raph would, for example, very in the moment child. Like, you can't really ask him things like, what did you do today, or where did you go this morning? Like, for him, it's like nada. And after OT, we started, he would talk about things that we did, previously. Like, last year, he'll say, oh, remember the beach that we went to? And he would describe it in detail. And sort of, I think OT helped, open up that part of him remembering and then articulating what he wants to say. What I did learn, my biggest takeaway from that is that we thought that things were just going over his head because he wouldn't say anything. He was very nonverbal. He wasn't, but actually he remembered everything. Actually, a lot of details that we thought he didn't notice. And it was just, he just needed to know how to put them into words. And so that's what OT sort of helped him do. And then it prepared him for the next step, which was speech therapy, which is a little more comprehensive. So he didn't do it right away, both at once. He did OT first. And then when he was ready to do speech therapy, then he did that, which is more language and comprehension, things like that.
Communication. Did you ever consider SPED, putting them in SPED, or has it always been like homeschool from the very start?
Oh, we did consider, actually. The funny thing is, like I mentioned earlier, we've always wanted to homeschool. It was a lifestyle that we knew is a fit for our family. What I wanted to do for the kids, whether or not, I mean, and this was way before the diagnosis. Like, we didn't homeschool because they were autistic. We were already ready to homeschool regardless, and that was just something new that we had to deal with when it came. And so, did we ever consider SPED? I think once in a while I would start searching, like, is there a place, an environment that I could put them in, special education class or school. But I guess what's so hard is that then it becomes school, which was
Yeah.
something that
Yes.
we that as a
Um,
family we already sort of decided that that wasn't going to be our
yeah.
path. So we did consider it, and then we would be reminded of our whys. Like, wait, why are we homeschooling really? Is it because they're autistic? And when we go back to our why, then yeah, then we just go back to, okay, we're still doing this. And until now, though, I mean, it's a year by year assessment, if you will, like, because if the time comes and we feel that, hey, maybe he should try going to school in this center that we found, and why not?
Hmm. How old are your kids right now? I'm curious.
My eldest is 12, and
Mm.
then Nate's 11, and then our youngest is 7.
Ah, 7.
Yeah.
The gap is
Big
long.
gap. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
it's a big
with
gap.
our youngest. I think it's also because because Raph was 4 when he got diagnosed, and
Mhm.
Nate got diagnosed like a couple of months after that. And
Ah,
so
okay.
we were dealing with 2 diagnoses at
Mhm.
the same time. And so I don't think we were ready for a third
Yeah.
just yet at the time. I mean, we already had our hands full. And again, if you're a family dealing with special needs, it's big. I mean, it's a big journey. It's something that you have to take time to wrap your head around, like, just personally. And so what more, right, having to deal with 2. And so, yeah, so I don't think that at the time we were really thinking of the third, or even like homeschooling in terms of the setup. It was really more
Yes.
of, okay, we have this, now we have a diagnosis. What do we do? Where do we go from here? And it was a long, hard journey for that. In fact, my husband, if you talk to him,
Mhm.
he would give this advice to those who come to us for, like, when their child had a
Mhm.
have a diagnosis. He would say, allow yourself to grieve,
Mhm.
not like grief like in a sad like loss, but there is a grieving
Mhm.
stage of, what you thought parenting was going to be like, and now it's a new journey. It's a whole other world that you're going to be dealing with. So, yeah.
I know you've already mentioned a couple of breakthroughs, like you realize that one of your sons is absorbing information through the gadgets, and the other
Yes.
one is auditory, and he
Yes.
has created music. But can you share one specific breakthrough just for
Mhm.
other parents to be encouraged to
Okay.
see that there are like the best things of this journey?
If I were to, take into consideration all the years that we've been homeschooling, all the years that we've also been dealing with them being autistic,
Mhm.
my biggest takeaway is that it really changes your perspective on them as your child, because, for example, in the beginning, not even school, but just the traditional, homeschool setup, when we were in that rigid sort of setup, I realized I was always frustrated, right?
Mhm.
It was always about, because we had report cards, and so I would have to grade, I
Ah,
would have to put
yes.
grades, I would have
Frustrating.
to measure his,
Yeah.
against this standard, like,
Yeah.
oh, they're already like this. Oh, this is a little more comprehensive, or like that. And it didn't sit well with me, because often it would be like, okay, he's a little delayed in this part, or, and I think initially it was always just that. There was always frustration. There was always um but not in an angry sense, but it
Mhm.
saddened me every time I realized how delayed he was, or how behind he was at certain things.
Okay.
And over the years, when we let go of that, um, I realized that nowadays we never see it that way anymore. It's not about, oh, how far behind are they, but rather, oh my gosh, they're already doing this. Like, my perspective went from worry and, anxiety and concern on their development to celebrating the things that they can do, the strengths that they do have, and celebrating, like, a friend of mine puts it as champagne moments,
Okay.
right? Because let's say against a report card, I could get angry and say, oh my gosh, he doesn't know how to add yet. He doesn't know addition. But then, and this was years ago, because of number blocks and because of toys that he had. When he started doing mental math, I was like amazed. I was like, wow, you can
Wow.
add and you can multiply and you can. And so it becomes this celebration versus, oh, we need to,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
setting him up
yeah,
against a standard, comparing him
yeah.
to, I don't even know where you get the title, like
Yeah,
other
yeah.
kids, I guess, or
Wow.
the age where they're supposed to be. And
Yeah.
so I realized, like, shouldn't that be that's a better feeling for a parent, that every day you're celebrating your child for who
Mm,
he is and what they can do, and things that they love, things that they're proud about, because
mm,
they show things to me and say, mom, look what I did, look what I did today.
yeah.
And we're constantly celebrating, and it's not uh it's not a worry, oh, they're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
yet grade
Yeah, they're not the
whatever
same as the
3.
others.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they don't
So
look alike.
and no children are alike. I mean, the three of them
Exactly,
siblings
exactly. Yeah,
already, they're so different. And they're
yeah.
even like my sister, who has 3 kids of her own. All 3 kids are different, and they're different from their cousins. And so you're celebrating the differences, really,
Yes,
in a more positive way,
yes.
versus constantly worrying about putting them up, letting them catch up or letting them be at this standard. So that was our biggest breakthrough, that as a family we really hold on to. I don't want to look at them as, like, I don't want to view my kids as something that needs to be, you know you need to catch up, or you need to
Yeah,
fix
yeah,
this, or
yeah.
this is
I
something that needs to
agree.
be, molded into you. But rather, every time they do something, it's celebratory.
Support system. So other
Mhm.
than, of course, your therapists,
Yes.
where do you draw support from? Because this is a more challenging journey than most. Let's just call spade a spade. It's harder in terms
Yes.
of raising your children, because not everyone is familiar with it. So you'll have to go through that too. So what kind of support system do you have? Who are the people who are helping you out, backing you?
um our biggest support system really is our family. We love that they can be themselves
Mhm.
in our family. I mean, and this is, sometimes I get saddened when I read posts about, like, oh, let's say a parent of a special needs child, and they feel um like they can't be themselves around relatives, or they
Um,
get comments from their, let's say, titos and titas or grandparents. And I'm so blessed that they don't have that. Like, they have such a good village helping us raise them, no judgment, no, on what we do. I mean, and this every homeschooling family can relate, right? In the beginning, like, homeschooling,
yeah.
really? Why? But that was just in the beginning. After that, I mean, they were very supportive. And the boys, they love, seeing their cousins. They love visiting their grandma in Baguio. They love being around titos and titas. Whenever we have a party, they would be so loud. Actually, they'd be loud. They'd come in and be like, we're here. And for me, the fact that they feel that way, that they can be themselves, and they don't feel, you know awkward or uneasy around our family is a big plus. It's a big support. Next is, of course, my friends, from work and from our spiritual family at church. It's super, I cannot emphasize enough just having the support system from other moms. And yes, I do find a connection with moms of other special needs kids, but even just, my mommy friends, regardless of, whether they have special need kids or not. I mean, we pray for each other. We share our hopes, our dreams, our challenges with each other. And that they understand, the complexities of our life. And by that, I mean, sometimes we just cannot go out and meet them.
Yes,
But
yes.
when we do, it's like no time has passed. Like they understand us. Walang tampuhan, walang, why, we don't see you na in our, walang ganon. Because like I said, just just raising them is so challenging that, and mentally as well. And it's so nice to have those friends who, even if you saw them last year pa, then it doesn't matter because they're there and they'll listen to you and they'll act like, you know, no time has passed. And for my husband naman, like the way he distresses kasi, he's not like, me na I would rant and I would talk about, our challenges. For him, he would sort of, it would almost seem like for him nothing's wrong or nothing's happening. And he has those friends. He has friends who they'll just send each other like memes and jokes and and he feels that like he has his safe space where he can sort of let that out. And so we have that great support system. And then the homeschooling community, I love being in the groups, reading and reading about their journeys, especially like starting, I think last year. Recently, I joined this group, which is homeschooling for neurodivergent and
Oh,
autistic
there is one.
children. Yeah, and specifically, it's support for parents of autistics. And the
It's
one
Philippine
who
based.
this is international,
Okay.
but there are Filipinos in. And what I love about this is the ones who admin the group and the ones who reply are actual autistic adults. And
Okay.
to see their advice from
Wow.
their perspective,
Yes,
they're
yes.
so, they're very heartfelt and sincere, and you sort of listen, you want to listen to them because they know what it's like growing up
Yes, yes.
that way. And so it's very helpful, like the input that they have, about self-regulation, about things that might cause anxiety, little things like that. And it took a while. Like I went from, I went through a lot of groups, and the groups that I'm in now, even our group, the homeschoolers of the Philippines group, is, that's sort of our safe space as well. Yeah.
So, how can we, the homeschooling of the Philippines and other homeschooling groups here in the
Mhm.
Philippines, not just
Yes.
because we are, we do have several groups on Facebook.
Yeah.
How do you think we can support you better? Not just you, but homeschooling families of neurodivergence. What do you think we can improve on? And I'm not just talking about the parents here. I'm also talking about the providers.
Yeah.
How can we support you better?
Well, this is from experience, based on experience, but I guess flexibility in terms of providing certain things. For example, because sometimes, for example, I would see a class like, oh, that looks interesting, but then it's a very rigid, let's say, oh, this is for 4 weeks and you have to attend at this time. And when I say flexibility, because sometimes what if after the first meeting and you find out like, oh, my child can't handle that class pala.
Mm.
Then it's a, oh, no refund or no
Okay,
no
okay.
or if not the time, like just being flexible in terms of the attendance as
Mm-mm.
well, because what we've been able to provide for our kids before, uh when we put them in, spaces or classes that were very flexible with time. And
Mm-mm.
that's because since we can't predict how they would be, let's say, on a day-to-day basis, this really gives us that chance to uh put them in, when they're ready, like even in terms of, for example, recreational stuff, like
Mm.
for PE.
Yeah.
We would bring them to trampoline park, and I love that they had these sessions. Like, you buy a bulk of sessions, say 20 sessions,
Mm-mm.
but you can use them up. Like, it's not a
Mm.
weekends only or this
Okay.
time. It's not a set time, and so flexibility is such a big plus for us. Um, or even we're looking into coding classes now for our eldest, and that's kind of the setup they have actually. Like, you could purchase the number of sessions, but it's up to you as to when they can claim those
Mm.
sessions. So
Yeah.
that's also a
Okay.
big plus for us, because
Okay.
as a family we can't predict how
Yeah.
our week would
Yes.
look
Yes.
like. So yeah, in terms of support, I think just being open, to talk about that, having, let's say, oh, here's a panel, and you're free to have a Q&A,
Mm.
and talk about it, would be very helpful. And I think we've had a few in the past
Yeah.
that I've
Yes.
attended. Yeah.
Yeah. I only came across one. That was with
Mhm.
EFL, I think. But other than that, I haven't really heard of another one. But there was a, this is why this is important to me, because there was one time that I received a message from a parent asking for help to hook her up with a special needs parent, because
Okay.
she was thinking of homeschooling her child. And I was trying to connect her with one, but I was subtly refused. So in a way, I was a little frustrated because I wanted to help, but I wasn't
Mm.
able to connect her with anyone because I didn't know too many homeschooling families who had the same situation. So
Situation. Okay.
yeah, so I wasn't really able to help her. But
I see.
yeah, so I'm glad that there are international groups, and I hope that we could find local groups as well for
Yeah, there
homeschooling.
are. I'm also part of another,
Yeah.
although this is more, it's autism, like for autistic
Okay,
specifically, not like
not for homeschooling.
neurodivergence as a whole. And yeah,
Okay.
not homeschooling. But you'd have to find a homeschooler who is special needs. I
Yeah.
guess
Mhm.
that's the challenge.
Yeah. The challenge with that though is that some parents do not see homeschooling as a solution to helping their kids in terms of
Mhm.
education. Um, what would
Mhm.
be your words of love and encouragement to other moms who are thinking of going for self-directed learning for their children
Mhm. Yeah.
who are neurodivergent?
I guess, again, based on our own journey, one would be to not forget who your child is
Mhm.
in all of this. Because obviously you're thinking of homeschooling as a path for education, right? And education means, you're getting, you're gonna be graduating, and graduating means a degree, and a degree means career, and and
Mhm.
that's sort of the connect the dots there. But I guess I would say, try not to let that,
Mhm.
cloud your judgment into,
Mhm.
why you're homeschooling. Because for us, like I said, we really wanted to homeschool, but after the diagnosis, and after, the years of being their parents, knowing how they are, just cemented the idea that this is what will work for them, that the whole idea of self-directed education works best for their neurodivergence. And so don't forget your child in the big scheme,
Yeah.
you know, because again, because education becomes like, oh, you know, what college they're gonna go to and what career they're gonna get into, and you know, as a parent of a special needs child, that can get really, you know, out of hand, like really fast. Like the worries about that, about their future.
Yeah.
And so I would say take it a step at a time. Always remember your why, as to why you're homeschooling. Any homeschooling family, um, we always advise, right? Like, what's your why for homeschooling? It can't simply be, oh, because everyone's doing it, or oh, we want to save money. You know,
Yeah.
it's not that.
Yes.
You
Yes.
have to really, you know, take that to heart. And second, if you're a person of faith, hold on to that, because there will be uh like I
Yes.
can't
Yes.
even, there will be days where
Mm-mm.
you'll really question,
Yeah.
like, what is going on? You know, this is not how I planned my life, or God, this is not how you
Yes.
wanted our life to turn out, right? Like, what's
Mm.
happening? There will be days like that, and so hold on to it. Don't abandon your faith, don't abandon your church, you know, don't um even though you can't, like I said, there'll be therapies and scheduling differences, and there will be that season where you might not be connected for a while,
Mm.
but if anything, our faith is what really keeps us going, you know,
Mm.
day to day. So we hold on to that. um and I guess really that, like, it, if you're choosing the self-directed path, then make sure it's self-directed, which is all about your child.
Yeah.
Look at their strengths, celebrate the champagne moments, you know, no matter how small or how big it is. Yeah, that is what I
I
have to
remember
say.
now my question.
Oh no.
Because
Pahabol,
I know
pahabol.
you are. I
Okay.
know you are a woman of faith because that's one of the reasons. That's one of the things that we share. We go to the same church. There is
Yes.
a specific verse that you hold on to with your husband every time you feel um, a little down or stressed in your journey.
I wouldn't say verse specifically, but the story of Martha and Mary.
Okay.
Because before, early in my journey in this faith, in our church, my then small group leader, who's now my sister-in-law, she gave me a book called Having a Merry Heart in a Martha World.
Oh,
And
okay.
I love that
I
book.
think you posted that on
I think
Instagram.
I did. I
You
did. I
did,
did.
yes. That's actually why I'm familiar with the book.
Yeah. So, and I, you know, it speaks so much now, especially now that, you know, we're homeschooling and we're dealing, you know, with our three kids. And I mean deal, like, in the in the
Yeah.
lightest way possible, but because sometimes it's just chaotic, it's just chaos. And we can be like a Martha, right? Like, oh, this is rigid and this is, you know, how we're gonna do things. But it's important to have, to be like Mary, to just be still and sit at his feet and listen
Yes.
to, you know, his word, read his word. I'll admit, actually, my husband is the more uh consistent with that. Every morning, you know, he'd wake up earlier than I do. And I think he uses that time while the boys are still asleep, before the chaos starts.
Mm.
He would read his Bible, and it's hanging on to God's word, right? The way Mary did. She wasn't like, when Jesus was there, she wasn't like, oh my gosh, what, you know, what can we feed you? What can we do? What can, she just sat
Yeah.
at his feet and listened. Um, and I think we need that in the chaos of homeschooling, in the chaos of raising neurodivergent children, and it can be and will be chaotic. And
Mm,
so I always hearken back to that story about, learn to listen and learn to sit still
mm.
and take a break. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that story too. And it also moved me when it was shared. Not the book, but the gospel was discussed in church one time. And that hit me too about
Yeah.
Mary, about just listening and then just enjoying the presence of the Lord.
Yeah.
Um, any last words to share? Anything to
Um,
promote?
well, one, thank you for having me. Sometimes it still surprises me when, I people would ask me like, how do you do this? Or can you
Mm,
share, how,
mm,
can you share tips or tricks or whatever? And it surprises me because what we're doing is just taking it a day at a time. And because really, what else can you do, right? Like, it's not like I'm choosing to do this, but it is what it is, and it is what we have. And so thank you for having me, because it reminds me that even though it doesn't seem like it, um who my children are and will be, and who we are as a family, can speak to other people. And so, the way we are, sort of, as, let's say, as a Christian, how they say, live for Christ so people can
yes.
see God in you.
Mhm.
And so this is just one of those reminders, like, you don't know who is watching, who is listening,
Yes.
who is being inspired. And so my final words would be thank you for that. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview for the podcast. I really, really wanted to talk to somebody who can speak to parents like you,
No,
because
thank
I
you.
feel that there is a need to reach out more and to open the connection more, so that
Mhm.
just because we're a community and we
Yes.
are a diverse community and we are part of just one thing, so we stand together.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you. My notes.